What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. They keep tweaking Mauga and significantly changing his playstyle and what he's strong at, which I think is throwing the community off a bit, whether it's playing as Mauga, trying to play with him, or countering him. This video is going to tackle it from every angle you could think of. Understanding the mechanics as the tank, and perhaps more importantly for the rest of you, how to counter him. I happen to know that they're still looking to balance Mauga. If they do add this new patch, I'll try to pin a comment. In the meantime, we'll work through the fundamentals of the mechanics that he has and how to master them as well as counter them, because I haven't had any trouble countering Mauga, which is why I don't rate him very highly in my tier list in my previous video. First, let's address some serious myth busting, because I see a lot of comments of players that are trying to use the exact wrong thing to go at Mauga with. One of them is Bastion. Bastion does not counter Mauga, disables do. Because the reason why Mauga is so sustainable is that his lifesteal shout is over the top outrageous and he has lots of ammo. So when he sets that up and is able to continuously fire on a target, nothing will kill him. And in fact, putting a tank in front of him, whether it's a tank character, big hitbox, or a Bastion, is like the worst thing you could do. That's his favorite matchup. An enemy deathball team comp that has very high sustain and maybe mobility with the Lucio Batiste is very weak to Mauga engages, because that's his major upside. And with his damage numbers lower, I don't even think he's that great at finding a limbs on his own. They've rebalanced him to be more about sustaining in those fights and winning with attrition, lots of ammo, lots of sustain. And as we'll see here on this Eichenwald clip, I only really start to lose when the enemy decide to do different things. Send a tracer at my backline as opposed to a Bastion onto me. Set up an Ana angle onto the cart, taking a fight there, and because we didn't go clear her first, that Ana will carry from that position. I can't win on the cart. And then on top of that, Sigma has multiple abilities to block my damage onto him. Okay, that's a super short version of seeing both ends of the spectrum. Mauga carrying and Mauga getting countered. Today's video is sponsored by Factor, a meal program I liked so much I became a paying customer. It's so easy to recommend because Factor has everything I could ask for. All gamers know convenience food is always a go-to. Factor meals are quick and easy. Poke a few holes in the package and 2 minutes in the microwave and you're done. But the real difference maker for me is that Factor meals are both tasty and healthy. They've got options for lots of diets. After losing so much weight on keto, I opt for that myself. But the most impressive thing for me above all is that Factor meals is fast food that's healthy and, most importantly, tastes great. Compared to takeout, which can be hit or miss when it comes to quality and expensive, Factor meals are more affordable and have always reliably been tasty thanks to their sauces and seasoning. That's what made me a big fan of Factor, and I think you will be too if you taste it for yourself. Delicious fast food that's good for you, that makes Factor a no-brainer, guys. So to try it out for yourself, you can use our link in the description or scan our QR code. Take the link and try it out for yourself and use our promo code POGYODES50 for 50% off and free shipping. I think the bigger Mauga trap right now is players think he's good at poking or that he's sustainable enough sort of vaguely in the front line. Neither of those things is true. While he can contribute to range damage, it's so low and so slow, it really reminds me of Ramattra's damage before it got buffed, which we'll talk about more later in the in-depth counter section. So because of that, playing more reserved and holding your position at range, waiting for the enemy to make a mistake into you is what you're actually looking for. While thankfully he has extra armor health now, it's a lot harder to just poke him out. He's still pretty weak to poke due to his big head hitbox. Through this whole map, I'm gonna stick on cover close to the cart to avoid getting overly focused, and the enemy Mauga is trying to go aggressive, fighting in places of the map that aren't that useful to him. And as I wait for an opening from my backline, either an anti-nade or some damage hit, that's when I look to go in and commit. Especially on a game mode like Push, which is all about camping an advantage, both on the objective, but also on map control. Step one to your Mauga gameplay is to hold a positional advantage for your backline and punish the enemy if they step out. Mauga's very good at that because he can close the distance quickly, set up and engage, and especially if Mauga mirrors, if you're trying to take the initiative, especially as this enemy Mauga continuously does in using his lifesteal aura earlier, that means waiting to use mine later. I dodge that cooldown, let my supports heal me, and then I can use my own. This is a very tried and true principle of Overwatch gameplay that you either can use your abilities for tempo to gain an early advantage, or for value. Being restrained with Mauga pays dividends in a lot of matchups. We'll show others where you want to have the opposite approach, but especially in the mirror, dodging their use of lifesteal and having yours after means you can commit later in the fight. The little mini game you want to play at range is shooting your 10 shots to set a target on fire with your incendiary cannon with your left click. Then you can hit them in the body for crits that deal more damage as well as give you overshield with the right click. They tightened this spread up so it is actually effective doing this at range, and I'd say the whole fire mechanic is a bigger percentage of Mauga's damage now. You kind of have to get that going for him to work at all as a character. I think push is going to be one of his better game modes because he's able to disengage. While it's most flashy to use overrun to run something down, stun it, and confirm a target kill, because you're unstoppable, it means you're pretty much guaranteed to get out of a fight when things start going badly. And push is all about maintaining ultimate advantage, not necessarily winning the game, or at least not completing the map. So the more we push into the enemy space and I see them use an ultimate, I just run away. You sort of just shake that off, take it as a win, because they will over time, over the course of 10 minutes, eventually lose doing that. They need to uptrade in order to gain some momentum back onto our side of the map at some point. As it stands, the enemy Mauga just simply doesn't use cover good enough. When one Mauga uses cover and the other stands more out in the open, I both get more sustain and more damage on him thanks to the fire mechanic. So by the time he does close the distance to be able to dual chain gun me, I can do the same back to him already with an advantage, which is made even worse when we start getting support utility involved. I almost feel bad a little bit, like, is this a DPS player that doesn't know anti-nade hard shuts down tanks and you have to play with fear for your life as if it's an ultimate ability? If you're always in cover, getting hit with an anti isn't that big of a deal, but if you're trying to press in and get anti'd, you're screwed. It's helpful, I think, to look at a few different tank matchups now. The first one against Reinhardt will be similar to the lessons we just went over, and what we're going to do is try to use our ammo to force the enemy tank's defenses out. In this case, they have a shield, because that's the thing that stops us from being able to lifesteal when we want to hard engage. And what I want to do is hold my cardiac overdrive until after I'm committed in, either with the defenses worked down or out of the way. In this way, I want to manage how much damage I'm taking by playing on cover a lot of the time and how much healing I can receive from my supports. Because the enemy tank, even as they switch to Diva, has a forward-facing style of play. They're trying to go aggressive into my team. Crossfiring them is very easy. Diva hasn't been a top meta tank at any given point in Overwatch 2, so I think the community hasn't really mastered her fundamentals yet, at least for 5v5. It's really important to remember as Diva that the majority of your tanking value comes from your team being in front of you. Ideally, if you can get all the damage on your team in a lane with them tanking for you, you'll see the maximal benefit. Pocketing teammates as opposed to you trying to be the dive threat yourself. There's better tanks to do that. Because this enemy Diva goes aggressive, it's not so hard for me to get behind her. Remember, the burn mechanic allows Mauga to crit a tank like Diva in the back, making it doubly worse to play this way. New Junk City, a few other matchups. Orisa is an interesting one because Mauga is actually the one character that is capable of landing crits on her while she's using Fortify. So that defensive cooldown just functionally doesn't really work for you in terms of denying you an opportunity to lifesteal off of her. She'll still be quite durable to your damage, but that's one reason why Orisa going aggressive is quite poor for her, which this enemy Orisa doesn't really seem to realize. Conversely, this enemy Brigitte actually is a much bigger problem for me, since a big percentage of Mauga's damage now is tied up in the burning effect, needing to get his auto crits on burning targets. Shields are actually much better against Mauga with that damage number lower, including Brigitte's little shield. The longer he goes not lifestealing, the more exploitable he is, which is what I think a lot of players don't seem to realize right now. It's not about dealing damage to him, it's denying his ability to deal damage. That's what's going to get him killed. I find this especially annoying against enemy deployables like Torb Turret, Bap Lamp, things like that, where if Mauga has to be the one to shoot those, not only is his damage annoyingly low to be able to do it, he's not landing his key passive. Not to mention, with the damage number being low, you need a lot better aim now to track these smaller targets. In these chaotic fights, you'll see me switching targets a lot, because you want to be efficient with your ammo, deny your counters, but also find a chunky hitbox that you can hit. If the enemy has a Bastion, I will use Overrun to go deep at it every time, trying to get past the enemy's tank even. If I can get a juicy dual cannon connection on the tank, I opt for that normally because I feel that's what my aim skill can hit. But if I was more skilled, I would coach myself to try to maintain the single shot incendiary fire into alternate fire much more. In the heat of battle, I find it a bit difficult to switch between firing modes and targeting styles, but that's the skill ceiling of this character and why perhaps top 500 level pro players will be able to maximize them. The way they've rebalanced the character is that the damage is less forgiving, so you can't really spray and pray and expect to make things fall over. You can on a tank to sustain, but if you want to have impact damage on squishies, you have to do the alternate firing of the left click into right click. If you master that, I think you could outplay even your counters. But for the average player, having the target priority to know what you counter and at least dual cannoning them as much as possible will take you quite far, I think. This enemy Orisa gets frustrated from me farming off of them, goes Mauga themselves, but the simple tip of avoiding the enemy Mauga when he's glowing red using Cardiac Overdrive and trying to use mine as late as possible without dying means I easily win a lot of the tank exchanges. It can feel scary to see them lifesteal when you can't, but try to utilize your armor health a little bit to be a bit brave to allow your team to heal you into your armor health again, rather than hitting the panic button to survive too early, and then you'll easily win the tank exchange. Now let's show some examples of going up against counters. Sigma will be the hardest with 2 ways to deny damage from you. So my goal against the Sigma will be to get in position that is safe for me to maintain, poke down his shield to try to get it to crack, to get that out, and then when he uses his grasp, reload so that I can commit after that. What I'm describing is big windows of downtime for Mauga to not be very effective, but this is where positioning and playing careful is going to go far for you, because while Sigma denies your ability to go more aggressive, he doesn't really go aggressive on your team very well. So positional advantage and cover can still go a long way. And I'm going to advise that you handle all of the tanks that have damage mitigation in the same way. On this Rialto, the enemy tries a few different tanks, and it's going to be their impatience that causes them the biggest trouble. As Mauga, I can play more passive and have effect because I can shoot from range for a long time. So if they halfway commit to an engagement, one more forward than they should be, they have to use their defenses earlier, and they only last so long, regardless of what they are. Defense matrix, bubbles, Rhine shield, whatever. A principle of poke characters in Overwatch is they want to hold their ground and work those resources out before they commit. This enemy D.Va doesn't seem to know what anchoring even is. It's so much more important for the enemy D.Va to peel for my aggression rather than go aggressive themselves. I can't stress enough that Mauga's range damage is severely unimpressive. So you don't have to panic. If he's not in on you, he's not going to kill nobody. His damage numbers are hilariously low, which is why I rank him so poorly. But for some reason, players seem to be getting baited into needing or wanting to go in at him, which is the only way he gets value. Which granted is kind of a new and punishing mechanic, similar to learning certain things just can't kill Orisa. Well, in the same way, lots of things don't want to go at Mauga. Now we're going to get to talking about the counters. First, a really big one for me because I feel there's a lot of DPS players that are picking the wrong counter pick against Mauga. It isn't Bastion, unless you're set up appropriately. The best one is going to be Reaper. The reason is because Mauga's damage is linear, not burst. It adds up over time, similar to like Soldier 76. Who also is a target that Reaper can get on, and even if you start to get worked down, he has time to use Wraith form to get away. Reaper is weak to burst damage. You're such a big, easy target to hit, he's gonna be lifestealing off you as well. And when one squishy can kind of neutral you out as Mauga, you are screwed. That one pick all of a sudden will make you afraid to close the distance like you normally want to, and you won't be able to poke him out from the positions he'll want to play either, not by yourself anyway. In this matchup, while I can farm the Winston's face, the bubble is yet another thing for me to crack through, and with how slow my damage ramps up, the enemy Mercy is allowed to get a ton of value just targeting whoever goes low. So even when we do kill her and the tank, as long as the Reaper lives late in the fight, I'm going to die. Because whereas I need my cooldown to lifesteal, the Reaper always has his. Playing as the Reaper, you'll want to position in a spot where his team cannot shoot you, but you can shoot him. Most effective if you're in extreme close range, but you need not be, because simply farming off him for an extended period of time will be enough to mark him from really doing much in the game. And we're not going to really add a support section to this video because I think it's a little bit obvious. You can pick Ana or Zen. Mauga's weak to disables, but above that, playing other characters, try to look out to give resources to teammates that are good Mauga counters, making sure that key teammate survives when engaged with the Mauga, because as soon as he starts that life leech fight, you need to make sure your teammate isn't the one to fall, requiring more attention if they're on Bastion, or simply bailing them out as Reaper. Especially in cage fight, I think what the meta will evolve to is more players will realize you just have to hard commit into it, because if he zones out a couple of your teammates and you can't save them, you're gonna lose the fight anyway, so just help them. There's certain teammates that have to live to make sure the Mauga dies, even if you put your own life at risk. As Brig, use your shield to tank his damage. As Mercy, remember your beam can go through the shield that he'll set up with his ult. Funnily enough, damage amping is typically expected to only go on backline characters safely, but putting it on your Winston, who has true damage through his armor, can even more quickly blast down that armor health, or giving it to Reaper to make sure he gets even more lifesteal off of the big hitbox. My biggest and most crucial counterplay options, though, comes here at the end of the video, which will more or less be the reverse of playing as Mauga and the reads you want to make as him. The most severe matchups I've seen so far farming enemy Maugas was as Ramattra, who I think is just the better version of Mauga. And here's the reasons why. Ramattra's range poke is simply far better than Mauga's. Yes, it's not a hit scan, but the damage number actually matters, and especially for Mauga players that play at range for too long, Ram simply wins that easily. Yes, he has less armor health, but Mauga's not really going to be the one to shed it off him. Ram doesn't have self-healing, but healing numbers in the game are so high, you don't really need that as a mechanic anyway. And because playing against Mauga is so all in with how you should use your cooldowns, I think Ram's got a lot of good options up against him. First of all, waiting to use your shield until he uses Cardiac Overdrive robs the character of basically all his sustain. It's one of the best answers I've found so far, because while Sigma and D.Va can do it as well, Ram's got far better poke damage than him all the while, so he'll be building his ult off of the Mauga while you wait for the Mauga to close the distance and do something. Whereas Sig and D.Va don't really feel like characters until they're using their defenses. Being greedy with your cooldowns as Ram already puts you at an advantage, I feel. Now, in this way, you want to utilize the staff kind of as long as you can, because I think punching the Mauga, you can use it to reload, or to do the other thing that's very good against Mauga is going aggressive against his team. Ram will have an overall speed advantage against Mauga, while yes, he can reposition with his charge, being able to run things down as Nemesis, and Mauga only having his ult for CC means you can kind of do what you want in multiple areas of the fight. Rob him of lifesteal, poke him down at range better than he can at you, and go aggressive at his team. Ram feels like he's got all of the options you need. Perhaps weakest in the ult fight, because Ram can lose being caught in the cage fight if he doesn't have support, but at the same time, he can also probably choose to infinitely block in Annihilation, which will lower the amount of damage Mauga is dealing, which can let your teammate potentially farm him. And then if he looks at you, you block instead. While he's still doing some damage to you while you're blocking, it's not like high enough for him to get insane lifesteal like he can maybe when a different tank has all of their defenses down. The way this is working is just a simple numbers game. Ramattra deals 6 damage per nanite, and yes, it's a projectile with travel time, so it's quote, harder to hit than a hit scan, but you'll mostly be shooting at Mauga, whereas he deals 4 damage back at you, doubled if you're burning, but don't forget, you can crit normally with headshots anyway. Like, the ease of crit due to burning targets kind of doesn't matter on tanks. Like, you already can headshot the enemy tank. As Ram, I already can headshot the Mauga. I don't necessarily feel like I need some fun body shot mechanic to get a headshot on him. I don't need the fire mechanic to get an extra crit, so that means I'm dealing 12 damage to him per shot, whereas the best he can do is 8, either actually headshotting me or the burning effect to give free criticals. Then on top of that, I feel the amount of damage that Ram can do over time is simply higher because he has the option to switch to Nemesis form and keep dealing damage, whereas Mauga has longer reload and really needs to maintain on the same target for a while in order for the fire effect to matter. So that means he probably has to fight you. If he tries to fight your teammate and they run away, well, he's not getting the free crits. The burning effect wears off, whereas Ram's damage can switch targets more easily to focus the thing that can actually die, and has a way to help facilitate that with Vortex to either help rack up damage or to help pin down a target, whereas Mauga only really feels he can do that with his ultimate. I really try to look back at this footage to see if the enemy Mauga could have done other things than get rolled over like they have been, but honestly, I think if you watch these few games I've included in this video, the Mauga enemies are trying to do everything. If they go at my team, I can place a shield from range to help them withstand the cardiac overdrive. I also think targeting squishies with the chain gun takes so long that you really need to be like a top 500 player, frankly, in order for that to be effective anyway, at least more effective than it would be any other tank, right? Like, I'm not so skilled, but when I play Ram, the things in front of me fall over and I have the move speed with Nemesis to chase them down. Whereas with Mauga, half the time I feel like I don't have the damage to kill them, and it's because it requires more aim to do the same amount of damage, as well as managing the fire modes. Then when the Mauga goes at me, then it feels even easier. Feels like I have all the tools to withstand him, as long as I have a little bit of support, all the extra armor that I get, and how long, specifically, you can whittle down his damage by blocking. I felt that as long as I was patient enough with my defenses, I'm kind of playing rope-a-dope on him, making him punch himself out. Well, then I get to punch their team out, maybe. Ram feels like he has constant uptime, whereas Mauga is really all about that one cooldown. And if it whiffs, he kind of falls over. That's the most intense tank counter I've found personally, but alternatively, there's a few other counters I would say to look out for. If we think of the reverse of what Mauga wants, playing here in a epic stall fight on Pariso Point C, the enemy Mauga is trying to come out and gain some value on the cart to swing the fight back, but as long as I'm somewhat conservative with my defense matrix usage, not going too aggressive with it, like we saw the enemy diva do against me earlier in the video, kind of sustain and wait and use it to try to absorb the damage he'll deal with cardiac overdrive, then he starts to look kind of silly, because diva doesn't need to reload, Mauga does. So you wait out his ammo, wait out his cooldown, and he's just a big sitting duck after that. Play around my heals, fortify my backline. The mobility advantage and damage denial advantage is so big, we are like going to win this fight until the enemy do something over the top to swing it back. Here's a couple dive instances for you. Here on New Queen Street in the Mauga Mirror, I can read by the stat card that I was outvaluing the enemy Mauga, but my team's running dive characters up against high value poke, Ilari and Sojourn specifically. So if my team dies and I rack up my ult faster, I deal more damage, it kind of doesn't matter because we didn't get any kills. And in Overwatch 2, it's important to create a leverage point to actually win fights, or at least it's an easier way to win, as opposed to trying to just brute force with skill, because I'd have to adapt my playstyle here anyway to go at the targets my team is going at, which would probably put me at bigger risk. Instead, I just go Wrecking Ball, and on this wide open map with great vertical mobility for me to use, I just harshly go at the backline to make more space for my Genji, get their cooldowns out, and because the map's so big, we're going to require the enemy Mauga to make a tough decision, tougher than the one I was just presented with. Does he figure out a way to peel back super far to counter the divers? He doesn't even try to, he just swaps to Roadhog, which we end up beating as well. Despite them having a lead, my wacky Wrecking Ball shenanigans, extra tanking life, and engages pulls out the resources of the backline, setting up an opportunity for my dive DPS to do their job. I mean, Ilari is just a all-in character. We talked about her in my recent tier list. I did rank her as the least powerful support for a reason. We'll go on to win that game. Here's another one where I'm trying to take a Mauga mirror, but I realize that my supports aren't as committed to the tank exchange as theirs are. While I do have Ana, I have a Moira, who's a character that wants to aggressively go at squishies to get value and kind of just needs to ignore the tank. So anytime I try to go in and the enemy Mauga fights me, I'm gonna lose. stuck in a fight up against Ana and Bap, who are uncontested, giving him much more value than the Moira can give me. So to lean into that aggression, we're just going to play with what our team strength is, as Winston go deep at the backline. As we've seen earlier, Mauga, while can shred Winston when he gets on him, Winston has the mobility and a shield to stop that from happening. Remembering I have a 5-second leap cooldown, get the bubble deep into the enemy backline, create a engagement there for my team to utilize, and I'm more or less going to play ring around the rosy away from the Mauga so he can't shoot me as much as possible and go at the squishies over and over again. This does make him hard to kill until my teammates land an anti-nade, or I zone out the Ana who's entrenched in the back, but we eventually will win playing this way. And it's not really until I make a mistake that me as Winston will I die. As long as I don't get disabled by their Ana, between my own armor health and shield, I'll be pretty safe. Like, Mauga's not that threatening. He only is when you decide to fight him. That's the crazy thing. Even at range, where he does deal more DPS than Winston does at range, he can knock off his armor. And playing kind of skittish like this, you realize just like how ineffective Mauga is at fighting things that aren't big targets. I think the best players in the world will be able to left click, then right click, and with insane aim can handle squishies. For the most part, that's way more effort than it's worth, and other tanks will deal a similar amount of damage far easier. For most players, you're really just going to succeed at avoiding giving him an easy target to farm. In comparison, Winston feels like an easy mode superhero that can play all aspects of the map, and our dive just kind of rolls past him. It's been a long video, and we've had a lot to say, a lot of myth busting, a lot of nuance that I think the community will take a year before most of us seem to agree on it. There's so much disagreement about this hero, but I think something that will sink in eventually is that Mauga's time to kill on squishies is not that great. And considering he needs to land damage to have sustain, you just need to fight him with squishies that are hard for him to hit, and unless they're pro, they won't hit those shots enough. Meanwhile, any other tank going at squishies is much easier to land a few second time to kill, even the slow time to kill of Winston. But maybe that's just because I have no aim and no brain and I'm just a Winston main. Only the Overwatch 1 OGs remember that one. Mauga has 2 firing modes, one that farms big targets and one that takes 10 years to rack up damage on small ones. Stop picking the big, chunky, high damage characters against him and instead pick quick, small, nimble characters that he struggles to hit. Enough of those, and you'll force him to swap, which all of that feels awkward because it's not like you can not pick a tank. If your tank decides to fight him, well, he's got a lifesteal target, and now you have to play in that world. But in the same way that over time we learned not to try to expect to kill the Orisa, we'll eventually all learn what feeding Mauga looks like and how not to do it. And all it takes is for your tank not to feed and your squishies to not pick the normal tank busting characters. It's rare in Overwatch that we get a character added like this, who becomes brutally more punishing when your teammate makes a mistake. The closest thing I can think of is like Doomfist or Zarya when your team charges them and they run you down. But one last counterpick example for you, just as the general rule and principle, we're going to have a Roadhog on my team here, who supposedly should be the best matchup for Mauga there is. But for damage, there's 2 key characters I want to add in at the end, Sojourn and Soldier. The better you are, go with Sojourn. Soldier is the budget option, or can't afford the pay to win, because these characters have distance control on him, can always stay far away from him, outside of his extreme close range, brutal time to kill, and as long as the map's big enough, you functionally should never die to Mauga. While I do admit DPS is a brutal role to play right now, I still think the power of supports tends to fend off DPS flanking on their own. They tend to need the help of a tank to get cooldowns out. So similar to how you can ranged hit scan pressure a Zarya or Junker Queen before they close the distance, you can do the same thing to Mauga. And especially when they make the mistake of thinking he's any good at range, or when they're indecisive on their engages, you can win even when your tank is supposed to lose on paper. Ultimately, healing as a tank is not that impressive of an ability. It doesn't win you the game. It just sustains you a bit longer. But Hog can heal too, and resist. So while yes, the Hog has to run from that fight, can't stay in it forever or as long as Mauga can, that's still a very slow tank exchange, while the gameplay of the squishies is wide open. That's everything for today's video, quite a long one. Took a lot of work to put this all together. And I want to thank Factor for making it all possible, both to help me grind the game more, but as well for sponsoring this video. Try out Factor today by clicking the link in the description, and don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell icon to get notified when our new videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.